The idea is today I'm gonna talk about some just real basics of things that maybe you already know, but maybe you haven't thought about. And hopefully you'll get one or two things that'll help you make better beats. I'm gonna go from some beginner stuff to a little bit of intermediate stuff, maybe into some advanced stuff. One of the things though I've realized over the past several years of teaching is that some drummers and producers or maybe people that haven't studied music theory or something like that, they may or may not know some of the fundamentals of why beats fall in a certain place. You know, why this is here and this is here. So that's kind of one of the things we're going to start with today. But by learning, and the theory part is going to be super easy. If you can count to 4, you're good. But the theory part will hopefully help you make better beats by knowing kind of why things are where they are and why, you know, in these kind of fundamental ways. Then you can sort of bend the rules, break the rules. You can do whatever you want with the rules. A lot of producers probably, and drummers too, a lot of producers probably hear a beat and they have good ears. Maybe you have really good ears, so you hear a beat and maybe you can kind of copy it. And side note, a great way to do that is just to practice singing a beat. So if you're that's a great, if you hear that and then you can sing it back, then that's a great skill to have. So a lot of musicians, most musicians are, you know, a combination of maybe this and this and this and this, and ears are certainly a big one. But maybe a lot of folks, producers, drummers alike, don't know why those beats fall where they do, or don't know what the kind of the fundamental underpinning of that is. So I'm going to start with that today. So I'm going to start with a little question here. And the question is, in most pop, rock, EDM, electronic music, you know, things that are in 4/4, and you don't have to really know what that means to answer this question, but most of the music that we hear on a regular basis all the time, blues, metal, most of these things are in 4/4. What drum instrument usually falls on beat 1? And just think about that for a second. If you already, some of you are probably shouting out the answer, and some of you probably don't have any idea what I'm talking about. So what typically in most popular music, most pop rock, all those things, what drum instrument of all these, you know, of instruments here, what usually falls on beat 1? So this is a great conversation I have with I teach guitar too, some of my guitar students, because if you're a producer or you play keys or you play piano or you're a vocalist or whatever, these are great things to know because you're often probably playing with drummers or working with drum beats. So understanding these kind of basic concepts are super helpful, even if you're not like a beat maker per se or a drummer per se or a producer per se. And then the next question is, and I'll answer both these in a second, but the next question is, what drum instrument in most pop rock, you know, this is just general, you know, probably 80% of the music we all hear on a daily basis, what drum instrument usually falls on beats 2 and 4? And again, some of you, maybe you've had lessons, maybe you went to music school, maybe you might already know the answer to this. So the answer to the first question is the bass drum. There's almost always a bass drum on beat 1. And I'm going to demo that here in a second. And there's good reason for that. The bass drum landing on beat 1 helps reset the measure. It helps start the measure over. And no matter what happens before it, there could be a long series of, like, you know, things that happen, or like a drum fill, or it could be the vocalist breakdown. It could be the drop in a song, or any of these kinds of things. No matter what happens, the bass drum, even if it's with crashes or whatever, the bass drum coming in back on beat 1 is a fundamental way that in music, in popular music over the past, I guess ever since even probably pre-drum set, but over the past, let's just say, couple hundred years, we have, maybe not quite that long, 100 years or so, 150 years, we've determined, like we've sort of been trained and we've listened to, it's a way that we've kind of established that this is where the piece of music is starting over. Probably pre bass drum, it was something else, like a fundamental tone that might come in. There's always been a beat, you know, as long as music theory's been around anyway, there's always been a beat one. It could be just an emphasized note, or it could be something else, emphasized note in the orchestra, or it could be a lot of things, or an emphasized note with a voice. But the beat one resets the beat. So let me answer this. Yeah, let me demo that for a second. Actually, I'll answer the second question was, what instrument usually falls on beats 2 and 4? And the answer is the snare drum. So when you hear this, you're hearing bass, snare, bass, snare, bass, snare. And let me show you that with a counting metronome. So just so you get this, make sure you get this idea.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
Okay, so that's about as basic, almost as basic as you can get in terms of just what I call a half note 2 and 4. And by the way, that beat is everywhere, and we've all heard it. And as producers, and that's kind of the first thing, it's one of the big things that I hope you'll take away from this today, if you don't take anything else away, is that now you understand the count of and why. If you've never counted those beats, because a lot of us work in, if we're working in Logic in a DAW or something, we're listening to a click, and we know that the beat one has this little, has an accent on it, dook, 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 dook. But we may not have ever thought about why. Why is that? Well, it tells you when to start, but that beat one is super important. And we're going to take this into a little bit of how to, I'm going to hopefully give you a few ways to spice up your beats a little bit, different things you can do with that. But that is a fundamental thing. If you don't take anything else away, that is a really good thing to be aware of. And this is something drummers that train start dealing with almost immediately in their training, and that is that we're dealing with 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. When in the example of like a drum fill or something like that, let me show you what happens if we don't have the bass drum on 1.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
You hear that giant gap there? That was just me not putting in the bass drum on 1. Now that might be a cool effect for some certain things, but that we expect to hear that 1. And again, like in the case of a breakdown, if we're playing something and then everything, we have a breakdown and we're waiting for the drop, that's oftentimes on beat 1. And so again, you get a big sound of some sort, and it typically is simulating the bass drum. Now sometimes we might start before or after beat 1 to sort of emphasize certain elements, but in general, all music does this. So when you're looking at a beat, and if you're making a beat, we probably might have been thinking about this as boom bap, or if you're looking at a pre-existing beat in Logic with Logic Drummer or something like that, maybe you kind of know that everything is built up from this. So if I take that, turn the voice down. that's all built from all that beat is actually, most of the time, when you start analyzing beats, that is usually still in there. And all that stuff I was just playing, the bass on, in this case, 1 and 3, and the snare on 2 and 4 is still in there, even with all that other stuff I was playing. So it gives you a basis to work up from, if you think about it that way. The next thing to maybe kind of think about with that is that I was playing some eighth notes there, and so if you've never counted eighth notes, let me just tell you that real quick, even if you don't know, even if you're not familiar with it. I'm gonna slow this down a little bit, and I'm gonna change this to eighth notes, and my tempo app's gonna say this.
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1.
So when it comes to thinking like a drummer, this idea, the way that most drummers are trained, so I'm giving you like a crash course on how drummers typically are trained and how they think. We arrive at this at some point regardless, whether we took drum lessons or went to music school or figured it out through years of playing along with songs or whatever. Eventually we kind of all arrive at the same place, maybe in different orders. But this idea of this next subdivision of notes being eighth notes, so now we've got 8 of these counts per measure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we're calling it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, because it's easier, I think, because the reason we do that is because it's easier than saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Although sometimes we do that. If you're sometimes you use numbers if you're counting, if you're trying to play in 6 or 7 or something, or 5. But so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, like the word A and D, and you'll see this represented in different ways. As an ampersand or A and D, or sometimes I see A and, but usually it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so. Again, when you're building a beat, so the 1 and the 2 and the 4 is still there, the 1 on the bass drum is still there, usually the 3 of the bass drum is still there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3 and 4 and. Usually, we might drop a beat or add a beat or whatever, but it's usually still there. But the way that drummers typically are trained, and again, just by knowing this, you can decide, like, you just want to totally just warp those rules and forget about those rules and like mix them up and change them. And that's part of the fun. But the way most drummers are trained is they learn quarter notes. So if you look at like a average, drum book, right? Learn quarter notes, and then they learn eighth notes. And then with eighth notes, you can do several variations, particularly, with the bass drum or the snare drum. So here's a few examples. So
1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2.
So that was me playing some variations of playing different sequences of eighth notes across. Those are just mixing up eighth notes. So this is super useful if you've never thought about making drum beats in this way, because now this is one of the primary ways that drummers are taught to construct beats. You know, they'll just learn the realization that we're taking variations of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we're playing them in different patterns. We're breaking up in different sequences and different patterns. We can also do this with 16th notes, and maybe we'll look at that in a second. But that's a great place to start. And I've got a couple of musical examples I'm gonna play here in a second that kind of tie in with this. Is my foot showing up here? Yeah, good. And this is kind of the next thing. Now that I've explained kind of those two fundamental things with quarter notes and eighth notes. Quarter notes we count 1, 2, 3, 4. Eighth notes we count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I'll kind of show you a couple different applications, and also what I might be thinking about if I'm playing along with some music. And let me just say that I'm going to be adjusting something here while I'm talking, but let's see. Do I want to start with? Yeah, I'll start with the guitar. As a producer, beat maker, and I do this too, by the way, as a drummer, sometimes we start with the beat and build up from there. This is a common way that if you're a producer and maybe you play a little bit of a lot of instruments and you're constructing songs, constructing beats, that can be a pretty common way to start. You can start with a bass line. You might hear a riff. You might have a melody. All these different things. And it's also, but as you learn these kind of beat construction ideas, and then you want to expand out from that, the way drummers often think, if they've gotten into this kind of, I'd say, intermediate up to, plus intermediate to advanced kind of level, is they are thinking about playing along with the music. So this is a fundamental difference these are kind of two different approaches, and we're going to sort of talk about putting them together, or this range of, we can be anywhere in this range. So one side might be you have just like EDM music as an example. So EDM music or electronic, just dance music in general. This is a beat that's been around as long as we, probably since the drum set's been around for sure. And sometimes we call it 4 on the floor. And the bass drum is playing all 4 quarter notes. It's kind of what I alluded to before, but except for the bass drum's doing all 4 quarter notes. And snares often on 2 and 4, and the hi-hat may or may not be there, might be doing something. And so, it sounds something like. That's a kind of a fundamental thing, and in that style of music, back to my range of things that I'm getting to here, in that style of music, it's pretty common to you start with that and you kind of build everything else on top of that. When you get outside of, sometimes hip hop's that way too, not always, but a lot of times hip hop's that way too. It's different beat, but different vibe. You get into levels of swing, and you get into more 16th note playing, 8th note playing, and things like that. But triplets, probably won't cover a lot of that today. But if you're interested in any of those specific subjects, leave me a comment, let me know, I'll do a video on it. But this idea of like making a beat and then putting stuff on top, so you've got this rhythmic pulse, right? It's particularly useful in dance music, because the main point of a song, like, the main point of a beat like this is to get people moving. It's a dance beat, right? It's to get people somehow moving, right? And there's different ways to do that, but I mean that's kind of the function of that. Even back before it used to be used in, this 4-on-the-4 beats. It was used in jazz in the 30s. I mean that old style jazz. It's still used there. Big band jazz, all 30s and 40s and onward. So ever since the bass drums have been around, people have realized like this sort of that it kind of makes you want to tap your foot, kind of makes you want to move. So that is one approach, and it's one that a lot of non-drummers use, and it's one that I use sometimes as a drummer if I'm building a certain kind of track. But what I also want to point out is that drummers that get a little bit, this is getting into the little more of an advanced idea and something you can think about when you're creating your songs and getting into the mindset of a drummer. Drummers that have been playing a while, I'm trying to avoid terms like advanced and good drummers or anything. But drummers that have been playing for a while, perhaps maybe play a couple of other instruments that are really tuned into listening to music. I listen to music. A lot of times when I'm listening to music, I'm not paying much attention at all to the drums. I'm listening to something else, the guitar or the bass line or the vocalist a lot. If you are in a band or an ensemble or with a vocalist, everybody's there to support the vocals. That's the main thing, typically. So one of the things that drummers that have gotten to this point where they're listening to these other things, we are looking for ways to add to, accentuate, meaning as a sort of accent, enhance other things that are happening, along with this idea of maintaining a strong pulse. If you're in a dance band and the idea is, get people moving on the dance floor, that's one approach, right? That's one. A lot of pop music's that way. But even in the context of getting people to move, you can still add to the music in a rhythmic way, or some people refer to it as a melodic way, meaning that you are listening to whatever melody is happening. Could be the guitar, could be the vocal, could be the bass player, and you are interacting with that. You're interacting with that. So let me demo that for a second. I've got a track here, and this is just this is a left turn here. It's kind of a heavy metal guitar thing. It's just guitar. I'm just gonna play with it for a second. Make sure we've got everything up. So the idea there was going from this very basic beat that I started talking about at the beginning, of just 1, 2, 3, 4, and then moving around, hitting the mic a couple times, moving around, and playing along with the guitar riff. So again, metal's a good example of that, because oftentimes in metal and progressive music, you do have this thing that I'm talking about. So that's a good example of where you have people playing counterpunctually or in unison. So counterpunctually would mean that I'm playing something that works, but is against something else that's playing. So like when I'm doing what I might call like rhythmic counterpoint, might be the kind of the fill I was doing. So against the right, that's kind of playing. It's along with it, but it's not unison. It's not unison until we get back to the beat. So one of the things that I like to listen for in this regard is when you're playing with vocalists, is trying to look for creative ways that are not, that won't take away from the song or take away from the vocal or be distracting from the vocal, but look for ways that you can enhance, accentuate the vocal part in particular. And sometimes it might just be like like in a pop song, or it might just be like one little thing where something, maybe at a climactic moment where something's happening, and maybe there's a certain part of the hook or something, and you're able to sort of emphasize that one little part by maybe playing along with the rhythm of the vocal, or playing along with something that's happening, like maybe the whole band is accenting something like that. They do this a lot in talking about pop and rock and stuff. In jazz, this is done a lot. Check my time here. In jazz, this is done a lot, where probably to the other. So I was talking about over here with basic beats, this range over here being like progressive metal or maybe jazz or fusion or something like that, where lots of unison playing, lots of things where we're looking for opportunities for the whole band to play together. If you're not familiar with that kind of music or don't listen to that kind of music, that's okay. But this idea, I think like a lot of mainstream music, again, if you're thinking like a drummer, you can take this kind of fundamental idea. Sometimes this is going to be appropriate, this basic boom, boom, and then sometimes this might be appropriate, this crazy, unison playing over here. Everybody's playing 30-second notes. But we can take these concepts, I think, and put them together and make better beats, basically. So let's see. I've got another musical example here, and let me just get this queued up. And I'll show you one more. So this next one, this is set 120, and this turned out to be a little bit kind of dramatic. It started out as something different. It turned out to be dramatic. It's just something I threw together for the stream here. Let's see what we can do with it. So I'm just going to listen to it and kind of try to respond in real time to it, to how it's hitting me at the moment. Which is, I guess, one thing that I sort of glossed over that we might think about is this. I talked about listening to everything, listening to the music, listening to the vocalists, all those sorts of things. That is a fundamental part of what we're talking about, because if you don't, I know this sounds kind of silly, but if you're not hearing the rhythms, or you're not paying attention to, let's say, the vocalist or the guitar player or whatever, then you're not going to play with it. You're not going to notice it, or you're not going to be able to accentuate it. Or also, you're not going to be able to make the decision to not accentuate it. That's just as important. Or to stop, or to be quiet, or to, all these things. But it does go along with listening. And so, thinking like a drummer, I would say that is, again, sorry for but good drummers, the drummers that are really, a lot of times, and drummers that have been doing it for a while, that are paying attention, they are making those decisions, sometimes in real time, sometimes when you're constructing a song, there's some drummers that really are very compositional about how they create their parts from start to finish. It's literally a composition, the same thing that they play every night, and it's this part and this part and this part and this part and this part. So that's kind of part of the idea that I'm bringing forward today, but just also this idea of, first you have to hear it, right? You have to listen before you're able to decide whether or not you want to try to accentuate it. All right, let's see what this one is. Okay, went on a little journey there. I'm going to let my dog out while I'm talking. But went on a little journey there and went from kind of building kind of small with whatever this thing I was doing. I'm going to take you through a couple of those things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2 or 3 different things I played, things that you can take from that little, if you take that clip right there and kind of follow along with it, things that you can take into your beats. Give me 1 second here. Dog needs to go out. So the intro, a couple things with that. That was all just improvised, right? So I didn't know what I was going to do. Never played that before in my life. So, so this idea of trying to make sure that the drums are not too loud through the vocal mic started really soft, right? 'Cause I was trying to. So I'm thinking a little bit compositionally now, and I'm thinking about starting down here and building. This is, that's a production trick that we do a lot of times where you build. You can do it by adding elements. You can do it by dynamics. You can do it. And the drummer is a super important part of that, because usually when you're building a track as a producer, oftentimes you can add oftentimes you're using percussion to do that. So it might be drums, it might be shaker, it might be congas, it might be, but you're using oftentimes percussion elements to build. In this case, I was using the drum set, but I was using parts that went from, this kind of part to that kind of part, maybe simpler to complex. I went from quieter to louder, meaning I started here, and then it got up to bigger, and then what was the third thing I was going to say? So quieter, louder, and I used something. So it basically went from kind of half time to double time, essentially. So doubled the time to get into the intensity, right? So this idea of for rock, pop, a lot of things, this kind of idea of a 16th note. I haven't talked about that today. I'll just say 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So it's just adding 8 more subdivisions to the 8th note that we talked about earlier. But taking that and then playing it quietly, and then I decided to add in a couple of accents. So that alone, like I said, earlier I said just take away this one thing. If the counting, the bass drums on 1 and the snares on 2 and 4. That's another thing to take away, is to say that drummers often think in terms of accents. One of the things that makes, if you guys have dealt with Apple drummer, Logic drummer, GarageBand drummer, which is really good, by the way. But one of the things that they've done really well to make it sound like a drummer, to make it sound real, is the accents, the dynamic accenting of the different parts. So, sometimes, and then people have a sense, people add this in when they're programming. But when you're programming like a more electronic beat, you add in accents maybe in the same way or in a different way. Sometimes we want everything to be like very robotic and sound exactly the same, but again, it should be a choice, not just something that you're not aware of otherwise. So, accenting. And probably inspired by, let me see if this is true before I say it. I hear in that, so I'm, without really thinking about it too much, responding to the accents. Come on. Oop. Responding to the accents that are played. So there's a lot of accenting going on in this. I'm going to catch a few of them. So listening for that's a great trick you can do. Just basically looking for ways to build a little bit of intensity with accents. Drummers do this in a whole bunch of ways. Sometimes I'm playing the hi-hat a good bit today. Sometimes accents can be done with the opening and closing of the hi-hat. Sometimes it can be done, of course, just by accenting literally the musical definition of an accent typically means that you are playing it louder. So if I go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, I'm accenting the ands, 1 and 2 and 3. So accenting, I'm using the term kind of across two perspectives there. But and then this idea, I think the next thing was bringing in kind of a beat, right? Bringing in kind of a 2 and a 4, and then did some tom stuff, and then built this up to a level of intensity. So another thing regardless of all the stuff that I played, you can go back and watch it if you want, but take this from that. Take this idea of when you're thinking like a drummer. And this is, thinking like a producer as well, but this is something that producers often really rely on the drummer for if they're hiring a drummer or if they're, songwriters. And it's something that you don't necessarily, you can get like with Logic Drummer, but you don't necessarily get if you just hit play on the generic beat that they've given you, which can be a good starting point. And that is the idea of the arc, So drummers are often like really, everybody, in a band uses dynamics, but drummers really will sometimes start really soft and then build up to something, and then the next section's a little louder, and then, the chorus gets loud, and then we come back down to the verse. And then, so this idea of thinking like a drummer and using dynamics like a drummer is, I think, another big takeaway from this stream today is this idea that use the drums along with other elements too. That's it's a whole other video if we talk about other instruments, but use the drums to help create the arc of the song. So here's one example. So the verse is here, the chorus is here. Back down to the verse, it's a little bit louder maybe, but a little bit more happening with the drums, but it's not quite as loud as the first verse, or it's a little louder, than the first verse, but not as loud as the chorus, which was up here. So it's kind of this stair step. Right now we're here, and then the next chorus is a little bigger, and just subtly adding that, and to that point, subtly adding dynamics as you go. To that point. Another thing, so dynamics, I'm really talking about getting louder and quieter and louder and quieter. Another thing that drummers do sometimes and producers do sometimes is being in the DAW or live, we speed up and slow down to create more excitement. And this is a deep cut here. If you've been producing for a long time, and maybe you know this one already, or if you've been playing for a long time and you've listened to a lot of drummers, maybe you know this already. Drummers spend a lot of time trying to be super consistent with the click. And it's hard. It takes some people are maybe a little more naturally inclined than others, but it takes a long time to get to the point where you can play consistently with a click, and yeah, it just takes a long time. So takes a lot of practice. But then there's another element to that, and that is this idea that, for instance, let's say you're programming a beat, and the verse is the song. Let's say the song is at 110 beats a minute, and the verse is at 110. Sometimes producers will, when you get to the chorus, they'll bump up the chorus maybe by a BPM or two or a half a BPM, just to give it a little more excitement. You may or may not, decision, you may or may not want it to be noticeable, but if it's not noticeable, it just feels like it gives it a sense of urgency. One of the famous drummers, if you want to listen to, if you're depending on how old you are and what kind of music you listen to, one of my favorite drummers, rock drummers that did this, and the whole band did this, like sped up and slowed down, but in a good way, was Led Zeppelin. The drummer for Led Zeppelin, his name was John Bonham, and he was well known for, just a well-respected drummer. A lot of finesse, a lot of chops, great groove, just cool parts, just very, very cool sound, very, very revered by other drummers. And to this day, and if you're not aware of him, worth listening to. The one that I like, with the speeding up and slowing down a lot, any of the studio albums you can hear, but where I really hear it, where they sound like the band is like speeding up and slowing down and speeding up to create more excitement, is, and you can just pull it up on YouTube, it's the BBC sessions, Led Zeppelin, the BBC sessions. And just listen to a few of those tracks. I don't have any ones in particular to call out, but you kind of hear how it goes from this tempo, and it gets more and more and more exciting and more and more exciting, and the whole band's moving together, and it creates a wonderful sense of excitement as the song is building to the end, and it's something they do in the studio some too. If you listen to the studio records, you can steal a bajillion parts from that guy, from John Bonham. So if you ever want to just like hear some cool drum beats, and the thing that we realize is that one of the things I've talked about today is this idea of there's only so many options of eighth notes. There's only so many options of 16th notes. There's only so many options of quarter notes. We can do a bunch of different things with them. We can and this, again, another video, but if you take like listening to a drummer that's really good as a rock drummer, somebody like John Bonham or something like that, or just pick something that you think you might like. The beats are the same across multiple genres of music. It's a little different in jazz. It's a little different in orchestral music, maybe. Blues has a shuffle typically, but in general, but there's a lot of crossover, between this idea of just there's only so many eighth note beats you could do, and taking those, particularly across rock, indie rock, in the past 20 years, we're hearing, whether we know it or not, and this is a good thing to start listening for, we're hearing the same beats often over and over. So it's kind of what we do with them. One last thing I was going to throw out here is and this is, again, thinking like a drummer. So this is kind of into the advanced idea. If you're programming a beat, this is just a concept. If you're not aware of it, that drummers do, and you may have heard it on a sample. You may have you may have a loop that you like that you use, where you've heard it and you kind of wondered what it was or wondered how it was done. And it's this idea of there's multiple versions of it. A ghost note, or we might actually be playing something called a rough, or a buzz, or a multi-bounce. And what it amounts to is something like, hopefully, let's see, can you see my snare? Yes. Something like this. Let me play a little bit of this. I'm going to change my snare sound just for fun. and see what happens. So kind of funky, whatever going on there. Drop the reverb. Just a raw, kind of a raw sound. I don't think there's any reverb on it now. So this is another little advanced. This is when I say thinking like a drummer. This is something that drummers like to do when the opportunity arises. Sometimes they try to shove it into a song anyway. But boy, funk music. You know, a lot of loops that we've probably all heard, you know, gospel loops that we've all probably used and loved and heard, and for sure fusion, for sure jazz, for sure chill hop, you know, there's lots of these things called ghost notes, and without getting too much into the theory of it, you know, ghost note or a rough or a buzz, those are different things. But basically, it's this idea of buzzing the stick on the head. I like to really. This is something that I do that's, you know, a little out there, but I like to really drag them out. I like to. So that's a little trick you can throw in, and if you now when you hear that, if you didn't know what that was before, when you hear something that's like, you'll know, okay, that's basically a buzz. It's a buzz roll with one hand. Yeah, so there's different versions of it, but there are samples of it. You can, I don't remember if there's one specifically in Logic Drummer, if they have like a convincing buzz, but I'm curious now. But for sure, I've heard it in the Amen beats and in various versions of that. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here. So real quick, a few things, hopefully that you take away. There's always a bass drum almost always a bass drum on beat 1. Snares usually on 2 and 4 in a lot of styles of music that we all listen to. Bass drum usually on beat 3 too. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Just remember that. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a great thing to remember. Hopefully when you're messing with beats, playing beats, composing beats, you'll start thinking about the counting of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what's happening when that click is going by. It's good to have that ticking away in the back of your head, the idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, as you're playing. It will help you think like a drummer. Same with eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It's good to have that ticking away in the back of your head. Remember that another way you can vary beats is by moving eighth notes around. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Remember this idea of accentuating listening for opportunities that not to say ta-da, ba-da, so that you're necessarily calling attention to yourself, unless that's what you're trying to, unless that's appropriate for the, looking for opportunities to play in unison or against, or this idea of rhythmic counterpoint I was talking about. I just touched on it. I should probably do a whole video on it. But rhythmic counterpoint. If you're interested in me doing a video on that, let me know in the comments. Rhythmic counterpoint. This idea of playing with or against or around other things that are happening. So using your ears, really listening carefully to what other musicians are doing, or other elements in the song. If you're here, totally fine. listening to other elements in the song, thinking about how can I build the rhythmic element by using that tool. And then two more things I talked about is this idea of using rhythm to speed up, which is counterintuitive because many times what we're really striving for in most music is we're striving for a steady pulse, where we want a steady pulse. But this idea of very carefully and selectively maybe having 1 BPM faster or 2 BPM faster in the chorus or something like that. And then also as a way to build excitement. And then you can bring it back down, and you can bring it up a little more. And then also this idea of using, of course, dynamic intensity, as I did in that middle example. So if you go back and you watch that, where it got bigger and louder and faster, and I changed, went to double time or whatever I did. So if you take 2 of these things I just mentioned and start putting them into your beats, whether you're a producer or a drummer or anything like that, I think it will help. I think it will help just give you some fresh ideas. And if you've already used some of these ideas, or if you heard something new today, please let me know in the comments so I can know if you want me to do more videos like this. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you soon. Keep on making beats.